calls are filled with C-suite executives talking about their latest and greatest AI strategies. The problem is, most of them are rubbish. Let's face it, they're spending millions, running hundreds of proof of concepts, and very few companies are getting a return on that investment. My guest today is Nathan Bell, and he's been delivering transformation initiatives across the telco sector in some of the world's biggest telcos for about 25 years now. And strangely enough, a lot of his programs have delivered a lot of value. So what does he understand that the rest of us don't? Let's find out. Nathan, welcome to the Tech Burst Talks podcast.
Thanks for having me, mate.
You've seen a lot of hype in your career, everything from the dot-com era, going through to 3G, 4G, and 5G. And now we have this next wave of hype around AI. And now you've finally left the telco industry. So first of all, congratulations on that. And you've gone to the dark side. So you're now working as a consultant and you're a partner in the digital practice for Kearney. My first question for you is, this is a major hype cycle. Is this similar to what we've seen in previous hype cycles, or is there something unique about this one?
So when we talk about hype cycles, there's always something in there that's going to be tangible, that's going to be real in terms of what we experience. I think the common factor here is we're hearing a lot of exciting noise about everything is possible and it'll change everything. I read an article yesterday where they were saying, I think it was like 90% of all white collar roles will disappear. And I look at some of that and I have to reflect on, okay, that's come from some person who's actually pitching their own software of why it's going to have an impact, which then takes me back to the dot-com era of, oh, there's so much demand for the internet and that's why all this fiber is required and it'll be huge. That said, I think the nuance that we see with AI is there are some amazing success stories out there in terms of what's actually possible. I think we're forgetting though, which is very different to the dot-com, is that businesses, everyone needed to be in web. It was consistent. Everyone needed to have an app. It was consistent. With AI, the way that we adopt that will be different depending on the context of where we're at, our organization, our structure, or did all of these different things. So I think there's clearly an element that is not going to be a hype cycle, but it's the way that we're approaching it, I think is what's giving that feeling like it's another hype cycle.
I mentioned what we're seeing on the analyst calls, but a lot of people are talking a good game. But what I'm wondering is there a gap between what they're talking and what they're actually delivering it? Are we seeing people starting to get out of that proof of concept mode?
And again, this is where we're sort of going around the wonderful fishbowl, right? So before it was, to your point, what's our internet strategy, or more broadly, what's our digital strategy? And then it was, what's our cloud strategy? And what you're finding in the boardroom is they just want that reassurance of, do we have an AI strategy? And in most cases, people are saying, oh, of course we do. We clearly have an AI strategy. It's perfectly fine. And then where you see the really smart folks are sitting on these boards going, fantastic. Now, what does that mean? And I think that's the delta that I'm seeing when it comes to AI. It's easy to experiment. I mean, you and I could sit here and fire up various Gen AI or various AI workflow tools and go, wow, look, we've done some things. This is really, really cool. And if we took that to a board, they'd be like, wow, that's amazing. Wow, we're the cutting edge. But when you actually go and ask the question of, okay, if you're a business that's now done 100 AI experiments, how many of those are actually now in production at scale?
And this is one of the challenges, because companies and executives are getting disillusioned because they're just not seeing the returns on their investments yet. So where do we go from here? I mean, what do you tell these people when you go in there and talk to your clients? How do you explain to them that this is what you need to do to potentially get a return on these investments and move forward with your AI strategy?
So it's very much in terms of learn from the past to help us prepare for the future. So when we looked at all the different digital initiatives that we were running, the view was that digital would impact everything. Well, it didn't, right? I mean, we talked about, we're going to have digital in the way that we drive risk and audits. We're going to have digital in the way that we manage our people. I mean, I never forget all the stories around RPA. RPA is going to be the silver bullet for everything, right? But we learned that where it has an impact is where we should be starting first. That yes, over time, I'm sure there'll be a broader impact of AI, but start where it's clearly going to have a demonstrable and a financial impact. And in that sense, then choose, where am I looking to invest in? It's great to experiment, and it's great to make sure that people can sort of learn what this technology can mean. But that investment doesn't have to be measured in the tens of millions of dollars. You can very cheaply give people access to AI tools that they can experiment and come up with ideas of what's going to work or not work, but then be very specific about where are you making your big bets and what are you going after. But the other point I'd add to that is, from a CFO's perspective, you need to start then thinking a bit like a VC. Like, I'll give you a bit of money, you show me an outcome. I give you a bit of money, you show me an outcome. And most companies aren't used to that, because when you go to IT, they say, oh, well, that's like $5 million. If that's what we need to do, like, 5 million, what's the value? I don't know. That's frightening. I mean, who wants to go and have that conversation? So the whole approach to this is what needs to fundamentally change.
But it's going to be hard to fundamentally change this, because as an industry, this is what we've always done. We just throw the money at it and hopefully we'll make some money back in the returns. Think about it. With 3G, when we had the license auctions in the UK, I mean, Vodafone spent 6.5 billion just for the license, not even for what it cost to build out the network. So we haven't been asking those questions. We did the same thing with 5G. We built it out and had no plan on how to monetize it. If people are starting to look at AI and think, actually, we need to have a plan on how to monetize it, I think that's a good thing, that we're starting at least to ask these questions.
The difference there is, when I was making those decisions, I was looking at it from a CapEx perspective. And I could say, well, 20 years, yeah, there'll be some sort of payback. When it comes to AI, because it's all software, it's all license driven, it's being felt from the day one that things are being implemented. And so, there was one CFO who was sharing with me that, oh, I'm spending a lot of money on actually going and supporting these teams to go and look at all these different areas. But unlike what I experienced before with IT projects, where, oh, it's capitalized, so therefore it's not really hitting my books in the way that I'm presenting it out into the marketplace, because it's sort of underlying, if you know what I mean. It's just sitting there. Whereas now, oh, we're 1 quarter in, I've got 100 initiatives. Fantastic. And the payback will all happen next quarter, right? Because it's on the above the line. No, we're not sure. And I think that's what's driving a lot of this nervousness, to your point of, we have to start looking at these things in the here and now, rather than just saying, oh, okay, we'll kick it down the road and it'll solve itself.
So we're going to go deeper into some of the industries later on, but let's just cover this off quickly. I mean, when you look at AI and you're talking to your clients, do you see any low-hanging fruit, like initiatives they should be doing now where they can get a quick return on their investment?
The first, most obvious one for me, and the safest one, is internal information. It's amazing to me when you go and speak to HR teams, finance teams, legal teams, procurement teams, how much time is lost because they're repeating an answer to the same question again and again. And you might sort of say, well, isn't there FAQs, or aren't there sort of documents where people can go and look? Yes. But in any large organizations, those number in the hundreds, if not thousands. And so being able to start from that point is a very quick win and a very safe introduction for businesses in terms of leveraging AI. And I say safe because we're not exposing the customer in terms of data or in terms of the interaction. I'm not asking people to reimagine the way that they work. We're actually just trying to make their lives easier. When you get beyond that, the most obvious one is going to come is in terms of customer service. Very much driven by the fact that we have huge volumes of transactions that actually aren't adding any value. There was one business that we were working with where I was amazed. I think it was like 48% of interactions that were coming from customers into the customer service desk were actually asking for updates. No orders, no issues, just, oh, can I check the status of X? Okay, well, what does this person do? Oh, they go into this system, they find out the status, and then they inform the person. Can a bot do that? Oh, I suppose they could, but we're not sure about the data. Well, then fix the data. Some of those fundamentals. So that's another key area. And the last one that I found absolutely fascinating is procurement long tail. When you really sit down with a procurement team, particularly large organizations where there are thousands of vendors, how do you know that beyond the top 30 or 50 that you might be actively managing, what's happening with the rest? Are they delivering per their contract? Are their costs in line? Are you actually seeing the performance versus the metrics that were supposed to be agreed? You have no clue. And then you might regularly or occasionally do an audit of certain vendors and then hope that you're going to get that theme and then say, okay, I'm sure we found the one where there was an issue. So I think those areas, and I've shown there's 3 different examples, right? So one is a very quick win, low harm, positive impact. Another one is very clear impact with guardrails to make sure you're not sort of exposing the customer to things that they shouldn't. And another area is areas that we simply probably haven't paid enough attention to that AI now allows us to go and do that.
You mentioned metrics here, and I think this is important because if I'm the CFO, a lot of times what happens when we're doing a lot of technology investments is we just give money out and people go play with their toys and hopefully we make money out of it later on, but there's never really a plan. But this game isn't really working anymore. So how do you talk to clients or give them advice about how do you actually set metrics on these types of initiatives up front so we're not just throwing that money away?
Yeah. And it's such a fantastic question. And I'm smiling because when I go and speak to business leaders about it, it's like, oh, yeah, because it's going to save us X million. Or when is that? Oh, 2.5 years from now. So you're asking finance to give you funding for 2.5 years on the hope that that's going to be an outcome. I said, that's not a metric. That's a goal if you want to sort of
It's
get funding.
aspirational.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think the real opportunity here is in guiding clients is to understand what's the metric for your MVP or for your pilot or whatever you want to describe it. And if you achieve that, then what's the next metric that you should be tracking? And when you achieve that, what's the next one? And the whole point of this is driving confidence. And this is why I love this concept of a VC model for funding from finance. If I can show that I'm progressively driving the right outcome, then this is great. And sticking with customer service, everybody wants this idea of having an AI agent that's answering all of the queries. Do I start with that? Probably not. What do I start with? Okay, how about if I could have knowledge management being dynamically updated and I'm reducing the number of follow-on calls that I have to take? Okay, that's interesting. How about then I can have an agent that's listening into the call and providing the next best action to the human agent to be able to go and get it resolved? Okay, that's interesting. And then I go and look at how I have these AI agents that are responding to more and more of these queries. I can demonstrate within months that I'm driving an impact in a progressive fashion. But because we get fixated on what I call the Hail Mary of go long and let's see how this lands, we end up spending a ton of money with zero confidence of that's the output that we're going to get. But we see digital firms doing it, so it must be true, right? That's the challenge.
And no one's selling you something there, right? It's just, oh, it's true.
It must be true. Yeah.
I like this idea about treating your internal organization, as venture capital investments instead of just throwing money at projects, make them pitch for it. Because you and I have talked about this before, and I'm not a big fan of large corporates or MNCs doing accelerators or incubators because I think that they always make a mess of it. They throw money at it. They think we're going to innovate, but they really struggle to bring those solutions and integrate them in with the business. So it never really works out. So the idea of actually advising companies or to set up a VC fund and make people pitch for those projects so they actually put together proper business plans, that sounds brilliant. The question is anybody actually doing it?
Some are starting to. There's a few that I'm quite positive we've been able to guide on some of these conversations of doing it in small areas. So for example, doing it with data, right? So, I've got a data initiative I want to drive. All right. So what's the value of that initiative? We're going to be able to drive favorite topic for marketeers, hyper-personalization. Okay, so we're not going to get there day one. What does it need to get started? I need to drive segmentation to another level. Fantastic. You show me that and what value that's deriving for you so you can drive more targeted campaigns. Fantastic. I like it. What's the next thing? So we're seeing some of that come through. And I think now people looking at that from an AI perspective of, okay, can I actually start to follow some of those conversations in the same way? But I would highlight, and I've shared this with the folks as well, that there's this perception of silver bullets, right? It's like, so I put a VC model in for everything and that'll be it. I'm done. It'll solve itself. You have to understand that you're driving these sorts of changes in the organization. We have to unlearn and relearn, right? So I'm introducing these new approaches, these new ways of engagement in a very pragmatic and phased way. So I might do this for 5 or 6 teams. And then I say, okay, so those are all pretty happy. They're recommending, others are now asking if they can join that format. Okay, I'll do it for another 5 or 6 teams and so on and so on. And the reason you're doing it that way, if you're driving the cultural change where there's ownership, it's much more likely to be persistently successful.
I do think this is quite interesting because it actually puts pressure on teams to actually start delivering value out of these projects. But I got to admit, I do kind of feel sorry for companies right now because there's such a great impact on your business, on your market capitalization because of AI. And I don't know if you saw this in the last couple of weeks, but a lot of the commercial real estate firms like JLL and CBRE, they dropped overnight by like 12 or 14% because people are starting to revalue that company based on the potential impacts of AI. And it didn't stop there. I mean, it's gone into private equity, it's gone into legal firms, the consulting firms, the analyst firms. A lot of them are getting hammered. And there's some really interesting stories coming out. There was one construction and engineering firm. They acquired this 50-person startup for about $370 million, I think it was around that range, 390. But the idea was that this AI company they acquired would automate a lot of the work that their engineers did. And that sounds great on paper, but when they announced it, the market hammered them because if it's doing the work your engineers are doing, what happens to your fee revenue from those engineers? What happens to the professional services fee? So you've basically just cut out a revenue stream by adopting this AI. So I really don't envy the situation that they're in right now because it's going to be tricky. And if I'm one of these execs, I'm going to be pulling my hair out. Now, these execs are your clients. So what do you actually tell them? How do you navigate this incredibly complex environment that we're in?
So I think there's 2 parts to that. We've gone through the phase of what's our ambition when it comes to AI? What are we looking to be able to realize? The problem is, I think businesses sort of get stuck in this loop of, well, we've said that now. Now what do we do? Oh, well, we'll buy something. We'll buy something and that'll validate that we're on the right path. But while all of this is happening, there's actually nothing changing internally. And I always share with folks that AI needs to be treated as a business capability first and a technology or an investment second. And if you look at it as a business capability, it forces the question of, okay, it's a business capability. That means these teams need to own it. Do they understand what the implication is of owning AI in their respective functions? Absolutely not. So how is that going to change? And if when I look at that and I see the gaps that exist or the efficiency that could be realized from AI, and then I'm asking the question of, is there something that I can make, something that I can buy, something that I can partner on to actually augment that? Then yes, that becomes more believable. But this Hail Mary approaches of, I'll just buy something and it will materialize, it doesn't work. But again, we've been here before, companies that were buying apps, right? And they said, oh, if I buy this app, it'll be the digital arm of my business and then that'll go and be the answer. It doesn't materialize. And what I find amazing is we go around these loops and we don't seem to learn from that and we go and repeat it again.
I want to move on a bit and talk about how AI has evolved, because right now the big thing is talking about agents. So agentic AI is quite unique because it actually acts, and it creates a lot of possibilities for how we can put that into our business or on our personal lives. But one thing you've mentioned about AI is it's always important to have this human factor considered when you're looking at AI and with agents. So can you explain, what do you mean by that human factor with regard to agents?
So there's a few different parts to that. Agents don't just get turned on and go, I'm going to do X. They're learning in terms of what we've done before. And there are great examples out there, and I'm not going to mention the company name because I think it's important that we acknowledge that we learn from early adopters. And so one example, they were having an agent that was now being responsible for a core part of their recruitment process. Everyone was super excited. The efficiency gains were going to be enormous, but all of a sudden it started looking for white men between the ages of 25 and 35 that like playing golf.
Brilliant.
Now,
What's the problem with that?
Well,
Except we're too old for that already.
quite possibly. Yeah.
I suck
My
at golf.
backswing's a bit rough. The point there is we were all surprised, or the organization was surprised, like, oh, how could this possibly happen? It must be a technology issue. And then later it was a recollection of, hang on a second, this is learning from our data. What does this say about our own organization and what we're doing or what we aren't doing, more to the point? And so that's the first element, is that understanding that these agents are learning from everything from our past. And it's the same conversation when in the early days of Gen AI, even when you were asking for, oh, show me a picture of a leadership team. It was all men. And everyone was up in arms like, oh, how can this possibly be? The people that are coding these algorithms, they're doing a very bad job if this is the result. And yet it has nothing to do with that. If you take all of the history of images of the last 100 years, like it or not, the majority of those images are mostly men. And that's what it's doing. Now we have to go and put these interventions in place to say, actually, this is what I want you to look at. This is the way that I want you to look at it. Anyway, so a bit of an aside.
But it's a valuable aside because agents are learning from us and what we do. And let's face it, we haven't exactly been angels.
Right. Well, and the fact that that's all in our data, and
Yeah.
then we've tended to forget about that. It's like, oh my gosh. And you see the same thing now in customer service, which is just amazing, where people are exposing these agents to basically start representing the business facing their customers and are stunned by the types of responses that it's giving. Oh, did no one actually ever go through the history of calls or queries that have come up before and the way people respond? Because if you're in an organization that has over 1,000 customer service agents, guess what? There will be some in there that are maybe not responding in the way that you might like, but no one went back and checked. And so that's what it learns from. The second piece, which is quite interesting, is we plug an agent in and we expect it to then go and operate within the way that we do in our organization today. I call this the bolt-on of agents into the business. But the way that an agent looks at the input and the output is very different the way that we look at it as human beings. And what's doubly fascinating is if we're asking people to work with these agents, if I say, this is the process, and you get asked what the process is, you might have some nuances or difference of what your understanding of the process is. And I've discussed with lots of business leaders, and first of all, they will tell me, no, our teams are very clear on the process. Are you sure? And if you draw it up on a whiteboard, it's quite fascinating to say, oh, he does this bit differently, or she does that part differently, or this function actually thinks this step doesn't actually even exist in this process. And if we're now asking an agent to be able to go and start taking the role of managing some of these workflows, and we then go, oh, well, it's a technology issue. What do you mean? It's hallucinating. Why is it hallucinating? Oh, because when Charles asked the question versus Nathan asked the question, they got a different response, but the task is supposed to be the same. But is that because of us or because of the technology? The last point that I would highlight is the set and forget mentality of agents is, oh, I've got an agent now. I can sit back and it'll just do the job for us. It's fantastic. And yet it's fascinating to me. Okay, so if you had a brand new employee, if you had an intern, would you say, there's the financial records. Can you now just go and manage that for us and make sure the spend's going to be handled correctly? And you would never do that. So why are we doing that with technology? I have no understanding. So I think agents are incredibly valuable, to your point of the impact that they can have. But this concept of, oh, I set up the technology and it runs like I have an app or like I had an RPA, it is completely so far off the reservation, it's ridiculous.
But I think this is one of the challenges we have with AI in general. We just assume that it's going to be right. And let's face it, it isn't. I mean, I don't trust any of the LLMs because I've been burned too many times where it's hallucinated and given me bad information. And if I would have taken that information out publicly or used it at an event, it could ruin my brand and reputation.
Yeah.
So I've really become very cautious and I vet everything a few times because I just don't trust the LLMs right now. And with agents, it creates a whole new set of challenges because we've talked about it from the technical side, but what about from the human and the people side? You know, if I'm working for an organization and my CEO is out there saying that we're just going to deploy all these agents, I'm thinking, well, where's my package then? I must be getting let go pretty soon. And you told this story recently about a CEO who had a little bit of an issue with how he pitched agents internally to some of his team. So why don't you tell us about that one?
Yeah. So we were basically talking with the CEO about driving his ambition and making sure it was clear to the team. And I got invited to sit in his town hall where he was going to present all of these great things that they were going to be doing across the organization. They had all his leaders come up, present different AI use cases that were being executed and the impact that it was going to have on efficiency and productivity. And all the executives are all high-fiving each other. This is really exciting. And I sat in the back and one of my colleagues who spoke that local language, I said, what are those two people in front of us talking about? And I said, oh, yeah, it's a bit awkward. It's okay. Well, what's going on? Oh, that person realizes that that demonstration was his job and the next demonstration was his own job. And so they're wondering at what point should they be contacting HR? Anyway, after the session, caught up with the CEO on the way out and he said, that was good, right? Very exciting. As you see, we're a leading company, a digital first, and now we're looking at AI first in the same way. And I said, yeah, I know there is intent and then there is how it's received. And I think something that a lot of leaders sometimes miss is that, oh, I got my message across, tick in the box, my job is done. But it's always down to the reception of that message as opposed to you just being able to get the message out there. Surely enough, a couple of weeks later, I asked, how's it going? And he said, yeah, some of your observations might have been right. One of those observations I'd made with him as I was walking out the door, which he dismissed out of hand, was HR is going to become your most popular function in the next few weeks. And at the time, he was like, I don't understand. I said, look, people are really concerned now about what you said and the way that you've articulated this. And he said, yeah, people were asking about when's their package going to become available because surely they're about to be made redundant based on what they've just seen. He then had to go back function by function and sit with people and say, no, I want you to work with AI. And unfortunately, the trust had been lost and it's taken him months to be able to garner that back from the teams in terms of what they're doing. But yeah, it's a great learning for us that the technology is great, the opportunity is great, but it all comes down to perception. I mean, there was another business leader I was talking to where his team had unequivocally told him there was no value from AI and this was a telco looking at the network side. There was no value of AI in the network. Absolutely not going to happen. And I said to him, look, do you have talent in your teams that you're really confident being retained for the next 2 to 3 years or even ideally 5 years? Oh, absolutely. We've got high performers and they're all in this retention programs. Fantastic. Go and ask them what they think the opportunity with AI and telling them that, they are part of the future of the firm. He did that and he came back saying, oh yeah, all of a sudden we have all these ideas of how we think we can use AI. We've got to get over this piece of the human factor of understanding I'm worried about me, then I'm worried about my team, then I'm worried about the company. The fact that senior leaders have this view of, oh, I'm looking at this from the performance of the company to shareholders, the average Joe or Diana, Frank, Sarah, whatever you want to call it, isn't thinking about any of those things. They're thinking about, I've got to put food on the table for my family. If I don't have a job, what am I doing next? And we just don't reflect on those things enough.
We like to talk about this from the technology side, but when you look at transformation, I mean, I know you agree with this as well. I mean, it's all about the people. You can't just deliver and implement a piece of technology. That's not a transformation. You need to bring people on this journey with you. And if you don't, it ends out just failing. And that's why, what's a stat at recently? Between 70 and 85% of digital transformations fail. But a lot of companies go into the assumption that if I delivered a piece of software on time and on budget, that's a successful transformation. That's an implementation. It's not a transformation. When are we going to learn how to actually not forget about the people when we do these major transformation projects and bring them along that journey?
It's interesting you mentioned that, right? There's an assessment we run with business leaders to see how ready are they to actually scale their AI ideas and ambitions and pilots that they're doing. And one of the questions that I ask is around change management. When's the last serious change program that you ran within the business? How successful did you deem it? Who were the champions of driving that change? And the question I always get back is, well, why is that relevant? This is just a technology. And then when I go and start sitting with the head of strategy, the CEO, the CIO, HR, et cetera, saying, so where's HR in your governance of driving your AI programs? They're not, it's not an involvement, but the technology is the easy part. If you don't have driving that change management program, it's not just that the HR person needs to drive it, but they need to be the one that's sort of quarterbacking it over who's doing what, where, and when. Otherwise, this is never going to succeed. And so when you start talking to them about, okay, I'm changing people's roles, I'm changing the operating model, I'm changing potentially the hierarchy of the way this works, removing middle managers because I can actually have people managing agents rather than having to manage large organizations. That is fundamental change. And if in your response to me, you said that, our changes only succeed 50% of the time and they tend to be left half finished, then don't invest millions and millions in AI because you'll never see the value. And it's a really difficult conversation, but it needs to be had.
I want to go back to agents again because something has come out in the last few days, which I love. I think it's so interesting. And I'm going to have to look up my notes a little bit because it is a little bit of a long story. So apologies for that. Last week, an AI agent tried to contribute code to a popular Python library that gets about 130 million downloads a month. And one of the moderators of that library rejected it because they have a policy where they only accept code that's written by humans, not by agents. Now, what's funny about this is the agent then researched the moderator, found out who he was, got his personal information, and wrote this character assassination piece on him and published it. Now, that's bad to start off with, but it gets even worse because now the guy who's the head of that company who had the agent, Sam Altman from OpenAI, ChatGPT, has called him a genius and hired him to basically lead their agent programs for personal use. And that means he's going to be developing the agents that we're going to be using for managing our emails, our negotiations, and some of our business processes. What are we getting ourselves into?
So there's two parts in there what you said, which I think is quite fascinating. One is the agent learned how to be an asshole. It actually never does, right? All it learns is, so if I write certain things or say certain things, there's a higher likelihood that my content is actually going to get approved. So all it's doing is running through saying, what are the scenarios of how I can get the right answer? Because otherwise it has to go back and say, I'm sorry, I couldn't do the task. And all these algorithms are driving to this outcome of you will complete the task. This is what you are requested to do.
I misspoke. It's almost like a decision tree. It's like we do this. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And so therefore it's trying to find what are the different avenues that it can take to get there. The second part of what you said, just super interesting, is, we're trusting in this person that's going to create these agents that's going to solve all this for us. This is the part that I think even most companies are looking at in the wrong way. When you're taking on an agent, the provider's not responsible. You're now responsible, right? It's the same way as if I put someone at the door who's going to be checking people coming in. If I haven't vetted the kind of person, if I'm not including them as part of my audits to go and see, is that person at the door still doing the right job that I need them to be doing and making sure that things aren't happening that shouldn't be happening? That's on me. That's not on the company that I hired a security person from. I can hold them accountable in some form, but I need to take ownership of my own environment. And I share that because this concept of human in the loop, right? And people are saying, we won't need human in the loop because there'll be AI for AI, right? I'll get another AI tool that'll monitor the AI tool and we'll direct it. And I'll just give you another example to your point, which sort of put that on steroids. A company had, and this is another business that I've been engaging with, it had a AI tool that was generating marketing campaigns because it was taking a long time to create all these marketing campaigns. And they said, we'll get AI to do it and can do it a lot faster. Absolutely true. Factually correct statement. Oh my gosh, it's generating way more campaigns than we can consume. I know. We'll generate another AI bot who will vet the campaigns and only put forward the ones that are meeting certain criteria so that we can drive that. But the first 2 weeks after that point, everyone's high-fiving. This is fantastic. The number of campaigns has gone down and the quality is super high. So we know that the first agent that's creating all of them is now being filtered to give us this really great quality. Then all of a sudden the campaign started shooting up again and up and up. And I was like, hang on a second, what's going on here? What everyone had failed to realize is the first agent understood now the role of the second agent and was communicating with the second agent to see, how do I make the second agent look like it's achieving what it's meant to while also accomplishing my goals? And when they went through the logs, they could actually see there was a conversation back and forth between these two agents to get to an answer. Now, what that tells us is, if I don't drive a human in the loop part of this conversation, ongoing regardless. I mean, I now speak to business leaders and say, your AI for AI is fine, but the second AI should never be able to talk to the first AI because of what these scenarios are happening. And then you'll hear, oh no, but don't worry, the technology will get better. So does the technology take on responsibility? I can't think of any technology firm that has turned around to an organization, I am solely responsible for the success or failure of your organization. Will never happen. And this assumption that we think it will is just fundamentally wrong.
I'd like to move on a little bit and talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that we're going to be encountering as we try and implement a lot of these new AI solutions. Let's face it, most large MNCs are burdened with legacy systems. A lot of times they don't have the right skill sets in place, they don't have the right culture in place to implement these solutions and deliver the transformation or the change programs that are required to get the most out of them. Now, I'm not the expert. That's just my personal opinion. Are you seeing the same types of challenges? And if so, how are you helping clients address that? I mean, besides hiring you to come work for them for a while.
If I'm lucky enough, yes. I think the biggest part we're sort of seeing is they're making comparisons between themselves and digital native firms.
Mm-hmm.
And they go, well, if they can do it, we can do it. We have all the resources. We have a data lake. We have the cybersecurity systems. We have a whole bunch of software engineers. It should be fine, right? This is okay. And then when I sit down with them and try and highlight some of the fundamental differences from a business and operating model perspective, not from a technology perspective, between digital and themselves, the gaps start to appear. So I'll ask the questions of, who owns data? And the first response I always get back is, what has that got to do with AI? I said, and that's the second problem. But let's start with the first one. Who owns the data? Oh, it's the head of data and the IT guys. No. If you create the data, you own the data. And if you can get to that point, then your stepping stone to who is going to drive AI becomes a little bit easier. But if you can't even address that, you can't get to the next part. Then understanding, to what we talked about before, is the operating model change, right? So who's actually driving and owning that? What operating model changes? So, well, if you have agents are acting as employees are now having to collaborate with agents. Contributors never had to worry about leadership and now having to lead the life cycle of agents. So all of these fundamental changes and challenges. And so having to actually guide them through that. Actually, the technology is easy. I mean, there's like over 100,000 AI firms out there today where I can go and find a niche piece or a very broad capability of whatever I'm after. The struggle is the business's ability to actually adopt it. So the big piece of what I'm seeing is speaking with these leaders to understand, if you're not ready to drive the transformation in your own firm, then anything you do is only ever going to be a veneer.
Which is a slight problem, I guess?
Slight problem, yes. Well, again, the history, right? I mean, we were there. Digital transformation, was it successful? Absolutely. We have an app. We have some RPA. I have some automated workflows and some self-service features for customers. Thanks very much.
So when you look at a lot of the industries, there's a lot of things they can start leveraging AI for, whether it's going to be for operations, employee engagement, customer experience. But there's a ton of risks around all of these different things. And I keep going back to this whole idea about the ethical use of AI. And we keep assuming that these things are just going to work and it's going to be seamless and we're not going to run into problems. And that's just not the case. It doesn't mean that agents will be malicious, but they're going to learn from us. And we've already agreed that we're not always good people. So how do you advise people about this? What do you tell them they should do? I was doing some research into the media industry the other day, and I was looking at how everything's switching to streaming. So they're generating content in new ways. But if you're leveraging an LLM to generate a new TV show, for instance, how do you know that you're not leveraging proprietary information? So, I mean, that's one of the challenges. But then you have to cast actors. So how do you know you're not leveraging AI to cast these actors, but it's actually showing bias in how you're recruiting these actors? Because let's face it, if you look back over the last 50 years of movies, there's going to be a lot of older white men in there, and it's not going to be as racially diverse or gender diverse as it probably should be. And these Things just go on and on across this whole media industry. How do you even start to advise clients on how to manage that going forward?
No, and I don't think they're ready for it because it's the implications that then become quite concerning. Even marketing teams who are using AI for image generation, and questions are being asked of, well, hang on a second, that looks quite similar to this piece over here. Oh, actually, that's what LLM learned from in terms of being able to create the image that you want. Okay, so am I now in breach of copyright to that person, or is the LLM owner in breach? How does that even work, right? So all of these questions are now starting to come up, which is making lawyers, I guess, excited and nervous all at the same time, depending on what's the
Because this might be the new use case they need. They can generate fee revenue just by suing LLMs.
Could well be.
I'm really curious to see how all this is going to play out in various different industries. But you look at a lot more industries than I do, so I'm curious your opinion. Are there any industries in particular that you think will really be able to leverage AI and make the most out of it in the near term?
Fascinating question. So I think when I look at who's leading this space, this might sound weird to say, but I'm seeing consumer goods are doing a hell of a lot more successfully on AI than what others are. And I think the driver for that is just the scale, right? The scale of workflows, data, breadth of products, particularly where you've got these consumer firms that are having a portfolio. And by portfolio, I'm talking hundreds of brands that they're trying to look at. How am I managing all of this? How do I make sure that my 97th, 98th brand is as successful as my first, second, and third sort of thing? So I think for them, the use case of this is just at a whole other level. Whereas I think for banks and increasingly now for telcos as well, it's very much on the protection side of thing, right? So how am I protecting my customers from themselves, even whether they realize it or not? Cybersecurity, again, both of these industries are having to be at the forefront of that with what they're seeing. The new battlefield of cybersecurity with AI is rapidly coming to the fore. So I think from an at scale perspective, I'm seeing that much more on the consumer side. Obviously, it's easy to say digital, and that's why I didn't mention that, because I think that's your logical go-to. Anyone that's a digital native firm is already proving a lot more successful with AI. But for those that aren't, there's a lot of consumer goods companies that I'm seeing are doing some amazing things. The struggle that they're having is the easy parts where they could demonstrate the value of AI, whether that's from a marketing perspective, whether that's from looking at a supply chain analysis perspective. Now, how do they go and scale that across other areas is proving problematic, because then the investment versus the scale of impact isn't quite looking in the same picture. But yeah, it's super exciting to see what's possible. And maybe that's the case of what needs to be looked at next. If you stitch together all these industries and you would look at security and you would look at customer engagement and you would look at portfolio management, you're probably going to get what the future of company could look like. But they've all had to prioritize based on what's going to have the biggest impact for them, right? So huge possibility.
But unfortunately, most companies don't prioritize security. There's all those little data breaches we keep hearing about.
Well, yeah, I don't have a choice. But I think there's a really great connection back to the AI piece. And I was running a panel session a while ago on this, which I thought was fascinating. The EU AI Act, great intent,
Yes.
Really, really good intent. And when I was on this panel, I had 3 AI firms that were super excited to come in and highlight to me, oh, no, we're absolutely compliant. How do you do that? Also, we basically run an audit of our platforms once a year for the customers. Okay, that's really good. So what happens for the other 11 and a half months of the year? That's when the client's at risk. And I said, oh, no, of course. So we work to manage that. But how, right? No one's looking at the security from this AI perspective. And then where it got super fascinating, I started asking the question of, and what if they start customizing this? Oh, well, then we're no longer responsible. How many firms customize software? Pretty much most of the ones you and I know, right? So imagine what that then means for these businesses going, okay, how protected am I really in this act? And how quickly will my vendors all turn around to me and say, it's on you? It was, I think, Air Canada had the agent where they were trying to blame the vendor and say, oh, no, it's their fault. And then they tried to blame the customer and say, oh, no, it's their fault.
They did worse than that. They actually sent their lawyers to small claims court to fight this. So instead of paying the $1,000, they probably spent 50 grand on lawyers at least. And what they argued was absolutely brilliant. They said the LLM thinks independently, so therefore it's an independent entity, which means we can't be held liable for its actions. I mean, they spent 50 grand on lawyers and got a lot of bad publicity out of that one.
That should have been a precedent for everybody else, but no one's talking about it.
I want to go back to telcos. AI can add a lot of value inside of telcos. Theoretically, it could be around their operations. It could be about network infrastructure management. It could be how you manage customers and the customer experience. If you were back in a telco now, if you're advising a telco, where would you tell them to start?
Look, it has to be customer service. That's just the one that jumps off the bat. I think the reason I see there is when you go and do ride-alongs with customer service agents, what bores them to tears is answering the same question again and again and again. And how often does that happen? It's insane. So why that wouldn't be able to be addressed by AI, no idea why every telco isn't sort of saying, oh yeah, by the way, AI first and human second for these category of interactions. The other big area that I see, and some of my tech colleagues might sort of be a bit concerned by that, has to be IT. Telcos have a huge reliance on systems integrators, large resourcing vendors, VPOs, however you want to refer to it as. And so in that space, you have to go and ask yourself the question of, if you're not using AI in IT in your own organization, I guarantee your vendors are. And what are you doing with your vendors to make sure that you're getting part of the benefit of that AI optimization that they're already leveraging? So those would be two off the bat. And the last one, which has always been a pain and challenge for me, is on billing. We do sample billing scans to see if these are accurate or not. When you're sending out millions upon millions of bills to customers, you're working on the assumption that, yeah, this is all accurate and correct. And there was one client I was talking to, which I couldn't believe, they have 10 different billing systems. And they're sending out, I think it was like 30 to 40 million bills to customers. And their view of accuracy is how many calls do they get into customer service that they have to go and correct that they've actually been picked up. It's mad, so the fact we now have AI can scan through all of those bills, validate, is there a change? How do I proactively inform the customer of why there is a change? But also understand, okay, I've got a systemic issue here, or it's an isolated issue, move on. Huge opportunity.
So you've spent a lot of time working on major transformation projects in these big telcos, but now you have the luxury of actually advising companies from the outside. So what are the lessons you've learned over the years from driving transformation that could help your clients, whether it's AI transformation or even just a digital transformation? What are your key lessons learned from your telco experience?
The first most important aspect I would highlight is people. What's the engagement of the organization? And I'll never forget this in my last job is I explained at the beginning of the transformation is we're going to go up this mount of peak hope or peak stupid for those that remember that model. And then we're going to ramp down into the valley of despair. And then we're going to come up onto the plane of sustainability or persistent value. And I'll never forget, every few months I would get asked, so we're in the valley, right? Because in the valley, it's feeling really bad. No. We're still climbing the peak. What? How? Oh, I'm not liking this. You're not liking this. But the rest of your team is still super positive that this is all easy and just implement a few things that'll happen. So that people lens is so incredibly important to get right. The second aspect is forgiving the past. There is so much interrogation of, well, why did we do it that way? And the moment that a senior executive starts saying that to a team, everyone backs off. Nobody actually wants to be the person, oh, hang on a second. Okay, so they talked about the past, it's an issue. Okay, cover it up, everything, we don't want to be causing problems here. So I think that's the second piece. And thirdly, progression over perfection. I've now done greenfield transformations, brownfield transformations, a hybrid combination of the two. And if you have a CEO who's willing to do greenfield and is going to be there long enough to see it from start to finish, then that's great, right? It's a huge investment and you can realize some amazing outcomes. But most people are very concerned of, okay, my tenure versus what are you going to achieve? What does it actually look like? So doing it therefore much more on a progressive basis. And I think a lot of software these days gives us that flexibility, even with the AI piece. We look at AI as another layer of the new architecture. It gives us that flexibility. So identifying what I can progressively start to change. And even to the point, by the way, and this was a fascinating conversation, everything I do to drive a digital outcome or an AI outcome, maybe in the interim, I actually need more people, not less. And that's okay. Because if having a few people that are filling in the gaps to do a handoff because I can't focus on that change right now because I'm driving a significant change somewhere else, that's fine. But it's where's the outcome that we're actually getting to? So I'd say those are the three biggest things: making sure that the people are engaged and are driving and connected with it, understanding the journey that you're actually going to be on in terms of actually getting there, and this forgiveness piece. And don't interrogate the past. What happened. What we do differently is what matters the most.
I like this people angle because if you go back a few years ago, everybody's company mission statement would say something like, our people are our most valuable asset. yet we tend not to treat them that way. And I think it's important right now because what's happening with AI is we're making people fear for their jobs, whether it's going to be through automation or agents taking over processes, which they might be doing before. We've just forgotten that we actually need these people to help run our businesses and to implement these solutions to transform our business going forward.
And it's because we look at the big technology firms who are making all of these huge layoffs of resources under the label of AI. But no one actually goes and explains well, what thing are they actually taking over? What's materially changing here? And I love the journey that Klarna's been on, for example. I thought they were way over ambitious in terms of what they were going to achieve. But now they've stepped back from that a little bit and said, you know what? I think we over-indexed. I think we went too far. Now we need to look at where we have people that are adding value versus where they were just acting as glue. And I think that's the thinking to have. But when a lot of the activities of glue we think about, we actually tend to have more of a reliance on third parties to do those things anyway. So when we're reshaping our organization, it doesn't have to mean that I'm going to be culling a whole bunch of people, because these big tech firms, they realized that the software engineers were a core part of their development and growth. They didn't want to pay a third party for that. So they hired them. Now they're reaching a plateau of, I'm not driving as much change and evolution of these systems as I did in the past. And now I can have AI helping me on some of that going forward. Fine. But that doesn't simply mean that any traditional businesses can now go and replicate that model. We are far away from that. So yeah, I just think we get caught up in, bringing it back to the very beginning of this conversation, we get caught up in the hype of what we see others doing. But when you step back from that and understand the path that some businesses on, particularly digital versus other organizations in other industries, is reflecting in terms of, okay, how do I drive the progress and the value from AI that my people can work with AI to get to a better business outcome, as opposed to making these big, bold statements that, I'll remove that function. I will halve this size of the organization and hope I get to the outcome. Hope's not a strategy.
You've been in this industry for a long time, and I'm just curious, what motivates you still today? What keeps you waking up in the morning going, I really love trying to drive transformation and solving these problems? Is it just because you're not that good at golf?
I'm definitely not that good at golf. I think, and I got to get back to my writing. I used to write a lot and I haven't written for a while. The thing that I love most about technology is the interaction of people with technology. I love it when I get to do workshops. So I do a lot of board sessions on explaining how AI works and what it means in their teams, and really hands-on experiences. And I love giving them that opportunity of how do they get the actual value from it, and seeing them eyes light up going, oh, wow, I didn't know I could do that. And then learning what's going to change for their job. I think that's really exciting.
And this is unfortunately what most of our industry has forgotten, that technology exists to deliver human outcomes.
Exactly.
All right. So you ready for the rapid fire questions?
Rock and roll.
If you had to bet your house on which telco is going to generate the most value from AI in the near term, which one would it be and why? And I'm asking you this because you've worked for half of them.
Oh, that's really, really harsh. So I'm actually going to say my previous company in M1. And the reason I would say, and I think it's more as a category of telco, M1 is one of the few companies that's really pushed all on digital and turned off all legacy. And for any telco that can actually state that they've turned off all legacy, I think they're the ones that are going to get the greatest value of AI, because they're the closest to a digital native firm.
That's an interesting perspective because they're not an incumbent. And sometimes we always think it's going to be the big players that'll drive the most innovation. But sometimes it's those tier 2 or tier 3 operators that can actually leverage these things in the near term to drive the most immediate benefit.
And we saw the same thing with MVNOs, right? When MVNOs came on the scene, why were they so successful? Because they were able to drive more over the top rather than having to get into the weeds of the engineering side.
And they've also mastered segmentation, which is something that the operators have been pretty poor at over the years. Why would we give somebody something that's tailored to them? We're the monopoly. They should just buy from us. Okay, next question. Best telco innovation that you've seen that you haven't actually delivered? Because I don't want you to just use one of your examples. Give me something else that you've seen in the industry that really impressed you.
That's probably fair. Best telco innovation that I've seen. I actually have been really impressed with T-Mobile's local customer service that they're doing in the US. So they broke away from the traditional views of, everything central to everything being local, everything being much more personal, and then being able to connect with the problems that small businesses are facing in their particular area. I think that's amazing. I think it's incredibly bold. And I think where everyone's trying to reduce costs, they've turned something that is a cost into an asset in their firm.
But if they could start measuring if that actually reduces churn, that shows the value right there. So that's a very interesting one that I wasn't aware of. So thanks for that. Next one, biggest telco myth that needs to die.
God, I'm pausing because there's so many I'm thinking of. But the biggest telco myth, the one that comes to mind is we can't actually change. And the point is they try lots of things, but they keep falling back to the way they've always done it. So why do you have so many billing systems? Why do you have multiple CRMs? Why do you have multiple apps and web front ends that people are going to? Because we can't push through with making the core of the change. We're not comfortable with, I might have to make this a little bit worse before it gets better.
I'm actually disappointed in myself right now because I didn't think of that. I actually have a list here of what I thought you would say, and that didn't come up at all, but it's very good. So I'm going to give myself an F for this portion of the quickfire round. But now let's go on. In a few words, where are telcos today and where do they need to be tomorrow?
Telcos are at a crossroads. I think they have a huge opportunity, but they're at a crossroads because we fudged our way through transformations. We got the tick in the box of being or doing digital, less so being digital, but definitely doing digital. And now we're in a very difficult place to say, okay, now I need to better go and drive AI at scale. It's an expectation, I think, that the market has on telcos because they're the closest to these other tech firms that we look at and going, oh, wow, all the technology that happens within telcos. So where they're at is at a crossroads. The choice that I think that they need to make, are they going to be adopting true transformation change? Are they brave enough to go back to the board and saying, hey, we're going to go through another iteration of change, but this time it's not so much about introducing new technology. It's about fundamentally changing the way we work, how we collaborate, and how we serve our customers. I think that's the biggest challenge that they're going to be facing into.
Well, hopefully they can, because let's face it, there's a lot of room for improvement. So the last question is actually a series of questions, but it's something different. It's about me giving back this time. You see, I appreciate that you've spent your time coming here today and, humoring me with all my questions about AI and where everything is going. But I think I can give back. I think I can help you with some life-changing decisions. So you're from Australia.
I am.
And you live in the Netherlands, but at some point you're going to have to make a decision about, well, do I stay in the Netherlands or do I go back to Australia? I'm here to help you with that. So what I'm going to do is give you some options. And the first option is going to be the Australia example. The second one is going to be the Netherlands. And you get to pick which one you prefer, and hopefully will help you with this life-changing decision.
Okay.
So consider this my public service for today.
Okay.
First one's easy. Surfboard or bicycle?
Bicycle.
Aussie rules football or hockey?
Aussie rules.
Good man. G'day, mate, or hoi hoi?
G'day.
This one's pretty easy. Barbecue on Christmas Day or 4 months with no sunshine?
Could that be a choice? Barbecue Christmas Day.
Yeah, that was pretty much a given, but I just had to bring it up because it is February, and let's face it, it's dark and gray here, and I miss sunshine.
By the way, in the Netherlands, I still do barbecues on Christmas Day. Yeah.
So now we move on to the important part because we're going to talk about food and drink. So meat pie or bitterballen?
Bitterballen.
Prawns in the Barbie or herring with onions?
Prawns.
This will be an interesting one. Vegemite or hagelslag?
Hagelslag.
Ooh, okay, that's one I didn't predict. Next one, Tim Tams or stroopwafel?
Oh, that's awful. I love both. Tim Tams.
Forex or Heineken? Got to move into the drinking
Heineken.
section. Shiraz or Genever?
Shiraz.
Fast food, Hungry Jack's or Fabo?
Oh. Fabo.
The last one's the most important because it's about health and well-being. And more specifically, it's about the risk of an untimely death. So in Australia, you can be eaten by a shark, attacked by dingoes, stung by a box jellyfish or a blue-ringed octopus, bitten by a redback spider or an eastern brown snake, which, by the way, is known as being grumpy, which I don't get why a poisonous snake has to be grumpy. You could also drown by being caught in the rip. You could hit a kangaroo while driving, pecked to death by magpies in spring, which is always fun, or attacked by a drop bear. Or are you more afraid of death in the Netherlands from being run over by a cyclist while just crossing the street?
Given my size, I'll take the cyclist.
Good man. I agree with you on that one. Let me just tally this up. I'm an idiot. I gave you an even number. You ended out 6 and 6. I should have made this odd. I thought it was going to be heavily weighted towards Australia, and I got that one wrong. So I'm very sorry. I do appreciate you coming on today, but I'm not going to be able to help you with that life-changing decision.
We'll get that later. Cheers, matey.
Thanks again.